Hello and welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about what we can expect from Path of Exile 2 in terms of minions. I try to compile as much information as possible from various trailers, content reveals, interviews, and sources like PoE2DB. I haven't had a chance to play Path of Exile 2 myself just yet, and thus have to rely on these source materials to draw my conclusions, and of course GGG might also introduce changes before the launch of early access, so please take everything that follows with a grain of salt. Generally speaking, skills have 7 tiers in Path of Exile 2, and you can get access to them by uncut skill gems that have the required minimum level for the skill. There are no restrictions in regards to cross-class skill usage, and you can find these uncut skill gems throughout the game, with persistent effects and support gems working in a similar manner. Skill gems have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 5 sockets for support gems, and you can add more sockets to a specific gem by using the appropriate jeweler's orb. You will also be able to add quality to skill gems with gem cutters prisms in the endgame, but we don't know anything more specific as of right now. You can swap between your two weapon sets with a certain amount of different passives invested into the trees, which can be set to specific abilities. These weapon specialization points can be earned throughout the game and represent one way of specializing your character. This means you can effortlessly switch back and forth between two loadouts for different abilities, like one set up for debuffs, like curses, and another one for everything else, simply by using the abilities in question. In the future, the weapon swap will also be able to lock in items if you only want to switch between passive trees, but this feature probably won't be present when early access launches. Minions work somewhat differently in Path of Exile 2 compared to its predecessor. For example, you can now command minions to move to a certain position, attack specific enemies, and even open chests without having to rely on specific support gems. In Path of Exile 1, minions come in two varieties, namely permanent and duration based minions. Some permanent minions have specific conditions, for example, Spectres and zombies require corpses, where certain duration based minions like Sentinels of Absolution, Dominance, and Purity require you to hit enemies in order to spawn them. In Path of Exile 2, minions come in the form of permanent and non-permanent minions, which sounds similar but actually works quite differently. Permanent minions automatically resurrect upon death after a short period of time, which is in stark contrast to Path of Exile 1, where you have to actively resummon them. The resurrection at least initially takes 7 seconds, and this counter resets whenever a permanent minion dies. The minion's survivability still matters a lot. The other main downside is that they reserve Spirit, which is a new resource used for permanent minions, triggers, and other persistent effects. It is scaled by certain items like Scepters, passives from the tree, and permanent buffs from the campaign. Non-permanent minions are duration-based and include bone constructs and zombies. There are also two special cases of non-permanent minions which don't resurrect on death but still have a reservation cost, which I'll be talking about later. Permanent minions come in the form of various skeletons and specters, with some specters sporting powerful abilities that they use automatically, whereas most skeletons have command abilities that have to be manually activated and can be used more frequently the more skeletons you have of that type. There are melee and range types of skeletal minions, with the former being mostly blockers and the latter either dealing lots of damage or providing utility. The melee types are skeleton warriors, skeletal reavers, and skeletal brutes. The warrior is the most basic permanent minion, is pretty weak, has no command ability, but has less reservation cost than other skeletons. The skeletal reaver is tougher, more expensive, and can be enraged, which drains its life and grants it rage on hit, increasing DPS in the process. The skeletal brute is also tougher, more expensive, and can stun prime targets on command, making it the only minion to do so. The range types include the skeletal sniper, skeletal arsonist, skeletal storm mage, skeletal cold mage, and the skeletal cleric. The skeletal sniper can fire an arrow which creates a gas cloud that deals chaos damage over time and can apparently be ignited by certain abilities to instantly deal a large amount of damage. The skeletal arsonist deals fire damage and can explode a minion on command, dealing a flat amount of fire damage plus a percentage of the minion's maximum life. The skeletal storm mage deals lightning damage and can call down a lightning strike on the position of all dead skeletons, dealing damage and creating shock ground for 6 seconds. The skeletal frost mage deals cold damage and can call down an icy projectile that explodes on impact with 100% more chill effect. The skeletal cleric is a powerful utility minion that heals other minions and can even revive other skeletons, which can completely circumvent the resurrection timer at the cost of additional spirit reservation. Spectres can be summoned by binding a monster to the gem, and use the abilities the monster originally had. The reservation cost depends on the power of the monster and thus varies significantly. The possibilities are near endless with this gem. For example, the cultist archer from Act 1 can slow enemies while also increase chaos damage taken, making it a worthwhile addition to builds that use Chaos Dots and the Skeletal Sniper. As I mentioned before, zombies and bone constructs are example of non-permanent minions. Unearth creates a cone of bone spikes that deal a small amount of physical damage and create bone constructs when killing enemies or hitting corpses in the area of effect. They are weak, short-lived minions that are limited to a maximum number of 8 constructs at a time. It double functions as a mana dump and corpse converting skill early on, and can later be replaced by zombies and more potent spells like Bonestorm, which I'll be talking about in a sec. Zombies can be raised from corpses, or alternatively by using a power charge and last 20 seconds. If a power charge is used instead of a corpse, they will be empowered, giving them 100% more damage with hits, 25% more movement speed, and have 30% less damage taken. They are a great addition to minion builds by boosting power while clearing areas and during boss encounters that spawn adds. Raging Spirits are a persistent buff from the Sorceress's tree that summons minions when you cast AoE-based fire spells or projectiles from fire spells hit enemies. You can have up to 10 spirits at a time, which have a short duration and don't follow you around, so it's questionable how useful they will be in minion builds. Wolves are another example of a non-permanent minion that reserves spirit and also can't be found in the witches section of gems. It's a primal skill normally employed by the druid, but the witch should in theory be able to use it. One interesting feature of the wolves is that they howl when summoned, which temporarily increases the chance for critical hits against nearby enemies. Since you have to manually resummon them when they die, it remains questionable whether they end up being a valuable addition to minion builds. However, since the druid might not be available on launch in early access anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if this minion was absent as well. There are numerous buffs and debuffs, starting with Contagion, which afflicts enemies to deal chaos damage over time. If the enemy dies while affected by Contagion, it and all other chaos damage over time debuffs like Essence Drain spread to nearby enemies and refresh their durations. Reanimating or detonating a corpse affected by Contagion will cause the minion or explosion to spread Contagion on hit. Bonestorm is a channel skill that deals physical damage and afflicts enemies with a debuff that grants additional physical damage for a number of attacks, which depends on the duration of the channeling. The spell can also consume a power charge if present to cause the impact to have a much larger area of effect. Profane Ritual allows you to convert a corpse into a power charge that can then be used for other abilities like creating empowered zombies. Offerings are making a return, but work somewhat differently in Path of Exile 2. Instead of consuming corpses to grant a buff, they now impale a skeleton which creates a spike that itself counts as a minion. Pain Offering grants an aura that gives affected minions 38% more damage, as well as 30% increased attack and cast speed for 5 seconds. Bone Offering absorbs the next hit on each minion and then explodes, and Power Offering extracts a power charge from the minion over time. Unlike Pain and Bone Offering, which have a limit of 1 spike each, Power Offering can have up to 10 active spikes at a time. Since the minion will be replaced with a spike for the duration, the inclusion of sacrificial skeleton warriors seems sensible even in later content. Curses are functioning similar to Path of Exile 1 and can be used to increase a specific type of damage taken, like vulnerability for physical damage, despair for chaos damage, flammability for fire damage, hypothermia for cold damage, or conductivity for lightning damage. Another application is the reduction of DPS by affected enemies via curses like Temporal Chains or Enfeeble. Marks are also present in Path of Exile 2. For example, Freezing Mark increases the freeze buildup by hits against affected targets for 8 seconds, which is probably going to be quite useful with a Frostmage setup against powerful enemies that you want to disable as much as possible. Sniper's Mark increases critical damage bonus for a single hit, and that's probably not going to be very useful for minion builds. If marks end up being unusable by minion builds for whatever reason, you can of course ignore this section. Another great addition to minion builds that focus on cold damage is Frostbomb. This ability deals a small amount of cold damage and applies a debuff that reduces life and energy shield regen by 75%. It also inflicts cold exposure, which reduces cold resistance by 15%. It's reasonable to assume that other skills that inflict fire and lightning exposure exist as well, but I couldn't find any sources that show those skills, so I guess we just have to wait and see. There's a range of persistent effects that are useful for minion builds that also reserve spirit and thus directly compete with permanent minions, but can provide a range of useful effects. Especially later on when you have more spirit at your leisure, they will probably play an increasingly important role in minion builds, provide more damage, better defenses, or utility. Cast on minion death builds up energy upon minion death, which scales with the defensive power of the minion, and triggers socketed gems upon reaching a certain threshold. This allows for the automation of certain skills and might be able to create a loop in combination with a fire spell and raging spirits. Grim Feast has a similar mechanic in the sense that nearby minions and enemies drop Grim Remnants on death that can be picked up to bolster Energy Shield. This can even overcharge your Energy Shield to double its regular maximum, which makes it an interesting addition to minion builds as a tool to increase Energy Shield recovery and overall defenses. Withering Presence periodically withers nearby enemies, which increases chaos damage taken. Depending on the power of the debuff, this might be a valuable addition to chaos damage based builds, just like the Spectre I mentioned before. Blasphemy projects link curses as a permanent aura around you, automating the curses in question for a cost of 30 spirit per curse. This seems prudent in combination with the Keystone Whispers of Doom by providing an increase to damage or defenses without adding any active abilities that you have to keep up. I won't be going over support gems in detail, but it's safe to say that there are hundreds to choose from, which allow for pretty much any specialization you may desire. One important thing to note though is that every single support gem can only be used once in any build, and since there are so many, this shouldn't be much of an issue at all. We haven't seen the full passive tree for all classes just yet, but we know that some of these nodes of the Witch are confirmed to be minion nodes, and it's reasonable to assume that other minion passives look somewhat similar. Even in Path of Exile 1, most minion passives come in 3 basic versions: Minion Life, depicted by a black figure with a red triangle in the center on a red background; Minion Damage, depicted by a zombie on a teal background; and Minion Speed or Accuracy, depicted by a zombie on a light blue background. Judging by the footage from the passive Respec showcase, this has been reduced to 2 versions in Path of Exile 2, red and light blue passives for minion defenses and minion damage respectively. Based on this, we can assume that the following clusters should be minion specific on the passive tree, which gives us a basic idea on how to path to access these nodes. Going up through the initial minion clusters and potentially picking up the minion defense nodes right next to them allows for a choice to either head into the left or right part of the passive tree. Going right gives you access to this double cluster, with one being minion defense and the other one being minion offense specific. This also allows for the allocation of this keystone, which I believe is Conduit. Conduit has been changed and now grants if you would gain a charge, allies in your presence gain that charge instead. This means minions gain charges instead of us, making the keystone actually usable with abilities that generate charges like Power Offering or Profane Ritual. You could then path to the left to get access to the various minion clusters there and pick up this keystone, which I believe to be Necromantic Talisman due to it being situated in the center of these 3 minion clusters. This keystone replaces Necromantic Aegis from Path of Exile 1 and allows stats from your amulet to apply to your minions instead of you. Hopefully we get to retain the Anoint from the amulet, since this wouldn't have any effect on minions because they don't have a passive tree. Whether this keystone ends up being useful heavily depends on the available modifiers on amulets, with uniques being a key focus to introduce special modifiers. Afterwards, we could path to the right to pick up another minion cluster, with our final destination being Whispers of Doom, which, in addition to raising the maximum number of curses by 1, also doubles activation delay of curses, but I doubt this is going to matter, especially against tougher enemies like bosses. There's one more notable cluster of interest close to Conduit, which looks like aura nodes judging by Path of Exile 1 standards. I believe this to be spirit-related nodes, which should grant additional spirit or spirit reservation efficiency. I can also see the benefit in picking up the curse nodes in the cluster next to Whispers of Doom, depending on how good they end up being. In terms of bolstering defenses, the Witch seems to be mostly about scaling Energy Shield, given the density of Energy Shield clusters in the northern part of the passive tree. Life scaling is not featured on the passive tree in Path of Exile 2, so you have to get this from gear instead. Just like in Path of Exile 1, Path of Exile 2 also allows you to ascend your character by offering 3 choices, of which 2 can be played in the early access version. They come with exclusive passives and notables, of which you can allocate a total of 8 after completing 4 trials of Ascendancy. There will be a total of 3 different types of trials to choose from, of which 2 will be present in early access. The trial of the Sekhemas is similar to Sanctum from Path of Exile 1 in the sense that you have a resource called Honor that decreases whenever you hit, and if you ever run out completely, you fail the trial. Just like in Sanctum, you also have to complete a set number of rooms with various challenges. You can either find fountains that restore honor or be given a bronze, silver, or gold key depending on the difficulty of the room. You're also sometimes affected by debuffs after completing certain rooms, and you might encounter a merchant that trades boons for holy water, which is a resource you gain by completing rooms during the trial. At the end of the floor, you have to face off against the trial boss, and only after completing this last challenge are you able to reap the rewards. You can now ascend, and are also granted 2 ascendancy points that you can allocate in the ascendancy tree. The other rewards are chests with different types and different rarity of loot that you can unlock by using the keys you obtained earlier in the run. Later on, you can also find and equip relics that allow for meta progression for this type of trial. Your other option is the Trialmasters challenge, which is essentially the ultimatum mechanic from Path of Exile 1. You have to initially complete 4 challenges, with each room giving you a choice between 3 detrimental modifiers that affect your run for the entire duration. Upon completing the last challenge, a boss fight, you'll be given the rewards shown before each challenge and granted the ability to ascend, and gain 2 Ascendancy points just like before. You can either stick to one type of trial or mix and match in order to get the maximum number of Ascendancy points. In general, access to the trials is granted by specific coins that you obtain while progressing through the game, with the last two passives locked behind endgame trials. These trials become more challenging as you start doing higher level trials to make sure that your build is up for the challenge, because upon failure, you'll have to get another coin to run the trial again. In terms of Ascendancy notables, we don't have the full picture just yet, but just like with the passive tree, it seems the Ascendancy classes of the Witch make it the most reasonable choice for a minion build. The Infernalist has access to the Infernal Hound, which has an aura that burns nearby enemies and takes 20% of damage from hits for you, meaning you get additional damage and greatly increased player survivability. It is essentially a carbon copy of the Guardian's Sentinel of Radiance from Path of Exile 1. One major difference between the two minions is that, unlike the former, the Hellhound can actually be boosted by support gems, meaning you can scale it as you advance further in the game. Pyromantic Pact replaces your mana with Infernal Flame, which is a resource that builds up whenever you use abilities based on the mana cost of said ability. Once you reach maximum Infernal Flame, you take fire damage equal to your maximum life and energy shield combined. If you haven't gained any Infernal Flame in the last 2 seconds, lose 10% of maximum Infernal Flame per second. This completely removes the reliance on mana flasks or mana regen in order to use your abilities, but does require some life and energy shield recovery to make up for the damage you will take. Bringer of Flame allows all damage, including non-fire damage from you and your minions, to contribute to Ignite chance and magnitude as long as your Infernal Flame is above 30% of its maximum. Since Ignites don't stack in Path of Exile 1, I'm expecting a similar behavior in Path of Exile 2. This means that Bringer of Flame is most useful when combined with fewer, harder hitting minions like Spectres to get large ignites going. Demonic Possession allows the player to transform into a demon that gets a stacking buff every second that increases spell damage, cast speed, but also loses life over time at an increasing rate. Jonathan Rogers mentioned in a recent interview that this was supposed to have some sort of effect on minions too, but since there hasn't been any clarification on this just yet, I would rate this more as a spell damage oriented notable, at least for now. In terms of passives, we know that the one preceding the Loyal Hellhound grants 12% increased minion life, the one before Bringer of Flame grants 4% increased mana, and the one preceding Demonic Possession increases spell damage by 12%. The Bloodmage has to start up with Sanguimancy, which adds a life cost to all skills equal to their mana cost. In turn, enemies killed drop life remnants that heal you upon pickup, and this does seem to be working with minions, judging by the video footage. It was also revealed in a recent interview that life remnants allow you to overcap your life to double the regular amount, which is a great boon in general. Crimson Power grants extra maximum life, equal to the energy shield of your body armor, which represents a significant boost in maximum HP, and thus a large increase in player survivability. Vitality Siphon lets you leech 10% of spell damage as life, and Gore Spike increases critical damage by 1% per 20 life. The other small passives and Ascendancy notables haven't been revealed as of yet, and are incredibly important in determining the optimal Ascendancy and allocation of points. What will be the best minion Ascendancy and which notables we'll have to allocate remains somewhat uncertain for now. My money is on the Infernalist because the Hellhound looks incredibly powerful, and the Bloodmage seems to focus more on dealing damage directly, judging by the notables that were revealed. In terms of gear, it's pretty obvious that Scepters are an incredibly important type of item for minion builds because they grant additional spirit, minion-related stats, and often even permanent minions that don't have any reservation cost. The latest Path of Exile 2 teaser also showed scepters that grant incredibly powerful persistent skills that grant increased damage via malice or increased minion survivability via discipline. They can't be dual wielded, so they should be combined with a shield, which will scale player survivability. This seems to be much more important than it used to be in Path of Exile 1 due to the added cost of failure, like breaking your path in the endgame and boss encounters resetting on death. We haven't seen a huge amount of uniques yet, but one of the more interesting ones is this low-level shield, which applies your block chance to nearby allies, which should greatly help with minion survivability early on. The crafting system is somewhat different from Path of Exile 1. You're mostly going to rely on adding modifiers with Exalted Orbs to proper 3 and 4 mod rares. These can either be found, bought, or made with essences that are now essentially transmutation or regal orbs that add specific types of modifiers. Crafting can be made more deterministic using meta crafting items from Ritual, like the Omen of Dextral Annulment, which allows you to specifically remove a suffix. You can later increase quality to scale damage or defenses, and even add sockets to items via specific currencies, with the sockets functioning more like Abyss sockets from Path of Exile 1. These sockets can be fitted with items like runes for additional modifiers like resistances, and the number of sockets is based on the item slot. Two-handed weapons and body armors can have 2 sockets, while other armor can have 1 socket. One additional socket can potentially be added with Val Orbs, which can also add enchants or completely reroll your items, so I do recommend caution when employing this type of currency. Since runes are a deterministic way of modifying gear, the crafting bench has been replaced with a salvage bench that turns items with quality or sockets into currency that can apply the respective effect to items. Other endgame related ways of scaling your build include distilled emotions from Delirium, which can be used to anoint a specific notable from the passive tree onto your amulet. Catalysts from Breach increase different types of quality, which enhance specific modifiers on your rings and amulet. You can get jewels from the Trial of the Sekhemas, which you can socket into your passive tree to get access to specific modifiers or enhance the effectiveness of nearby passives. Soul cores will be available from the Trialmasters challenge and can be fitted into item sockets which grant modifiers that cannot be obtained from runes. And that's pretty much all I have for now. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments. I try to get to them as soon as I can. I'll update you on any minion specific teasers that are released before launch, and I'm definitely going to stream a lot of Path of Exile 2 in the weeks to come. You can find my socials, including Twitch, Discord, and Patreon on my channel page, on the description of this video. I hope you liked it. Until next time.